welcome to this ripoff of Half in the Bag. I'm Tyler,
Hello, I'm Steven.
and today we're going to talk about Rebecca, both the book and the movie. Well, Steven, what did you think of Rebecca?
I thought it was okay. Both the film and the book, they're definitely decent. I liked certain aspects a lot more than other aspects. There's a lot of things I like in the movie that translate over from the book. There's a lot of things I like about the movie individually, but I think if you take away some certain filmmaking aspects and things like that, they're just kind of fine. The film seems like it's very rushed. It seems like they kind of get into things too quickly, and then it kind of drags in the middle, and then it's like, oh, it just has like pacing issues. And with a book, it doesn't really have as many pacing issues because you can afford to put more like introspective themes and things into the book and provide what the characters, specifically Mr. Winter, number 2, is actually thinking. So it kind of extends that out to make it seem, less like it's like, all right, they met 3 days ago and now they're married and now they're burning down the house. It's definitely not bad. I like the book. I think it's very good. It's a nice kind of romantic era romance/tragedy kind of thing, and I really like the aspect of like the little interrogation in the middle or towards the end actually, where they're like, "You killed her," and her trying to convince everyone that Maxim killed his wife. It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I like that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, we were talking last night in preparation for this. We talked about how the Wikipedia page, the plot points can be summed up in like 2 paragraphs, not even. But basically, like the book and the film follow the same story. It's just that the book has a lot more nuance in the character of the second Mrs. Winter, and it's a lot more introspection, a lot more like diving into the thoughts and minds of the characters. Yeah, I really liked the film, although, like you said, I felt like it definitely feels a little like it's much faster paced than the original story, and that kind of can create some dissonance between like what the characters are experiencing and what they're feeling and how fast things are moving. Like, it's a little less believable how much Mrs. Winter cares about Maxim in the movie version, considering it feels like they've known each other for a couple days.
I think in particular, like, there's just a couple editing things where it seems like things take place in the same day. In the movie, where in the book they explicitly take like weeks or something,
Right.
where
Yeah.
it seems like she talks to with her Van Hoff. What's her?
Yeah. The woman that she's paid to take care of. Yeah.
She talks to her, and then she goes on to like her tennis lessons, and they take the ride in the car. And then they take another ride in the car, and the way the movie's presented, it's like, wait a minute, that seems like they took a ride in the car, 2 rides in the car on the same day. What's going on? Maxim likes his car this much? Like, dude, okay. I don't know how actually much older she was than Laurence Olivier, but she seems like she's like 10 to 15 years older, and he has absolutely no interest. And so it makes that plot point seem a little weaker. But also in the book, you don't know how old she is or what she looks like, so
Right.
it kind of the book lends it to be like, oh, it makes more sense that she would feel like some sort of love rivalry with the protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
So
another thing about the book, I mean, even though this was written in 1938, it was taking after the Romanticism era of literature a lot, and yeah, I was just interested in talking about that for a little bit. How both the film and the book try to kind of like capture a lot of the specifically Gothic literature of that era.
Hitchcock, he's a good filmmaker. He knows how to make the film look pretty. He knows how to frame shots. He knows how to make things look good. And the scene where they're pulling up to Mandalay, and it like appears from behind the trees,
Mm-hmm.
and Max, that's where I live. That's Mandalay.
That's it. That's Mandalay.
That's a very, very good shot, and it kind of captures like that gothic atmosphere of, like, ooh, oh, look at that. Mandalay is like in the movie. It seems like a very old building. It's like how I imagined it in my head in the book. It's very cool to like see it in motion, and it's. I think he did a very. That's like definitely the aesthetic of the film, and like everything about it is very close to how I would picture it from all the descriptions in the novel, because it seems like the same exact thing where it's like, that's nice, that's hot.
Oh, that's hot. That's hot.
Yeah, it's I think it's interesting how they try to like replicate a lot of the imagery from the book with like more modern, or at least contemporary for that time, techniques. Like there's a lot of long shadows, which is borrowed from like noir films, and almost like shots that are like similar to like German expressionism, like from the 1920s, you know, stuff like that. And there are certain shots in there, for the most part, aside from the lighting and the noir effects, it's pretty standard Hollywood frames and shots. But there's like occasionally there's some really experimental shots. Like there's this one I remember where it's the second Mrs. De Winter, and she's in the foreground and it's lit beautifully, and then the background just like fades behind her and she's in darkness. I don't know. It's a shot that I think only a director like Hitchcock would think to put in there, but at the same time captures a lot of the same spirit of the book and the gothic genre.
Yeah, I also think we were talking about how cool this shot is when we were watching it. The where Maxim's telling her what happened, and it puts on the seat where his first wife was sitting, Rebecca was sitting.
Right. Yeah.
Talking about how she rises up, the camera moves up and pans with it. That's completely separate from the text, you know? It's like that's like entirely a vision of Hitchcock. We don't, right? We don't ever see Rebecca,
no,
like in a flashback or anything. I think that's really good, because it kind of, from like both the book and the movie kind of perspective, it's like you're just left to sort of imagine who this woman was that did all of these things, you know, who completely changed the course of the second Mr. Winter's life. And I think that's something I just like, oh, that's really interesting. Because I think a lot of the terror of Rebecca's character would be taken out if she was sitting there and we saw in a flashback she was on the porch and she was wringing her fingers together.
yeah.
I'm going to die of cancer. I better free Max my murder before I go out so I can ruin his life.
It's like, no, we don't know what she's like.
We're going to talk about the character of Mrs. Danvers and how the book is cited as like an early representation of a lesbian character, and the film to a lesser extent shows this, but it's a lot more. A lot of it was censored. You know, the 1930s implemented the Hays Code, or the Motion Picture Production Code, and so a lot of things had to be cut because at the time it was considered too scandalous and too inappropriate.
No, I think it's really interesting. Kind of, it makes her character a little more, in a way. Hear me out here.
Okay.
Kind of more intimidating, because in the book she's like, you know, you can tell there's some sort of romantic feelings that she has for Rebecca, and that's informing her decisions towards like kicking Miss De Winter out of the home and like, you don't deserve to be here. He wants his first wife back, things like that she says throughout the film.
Mm-hmm.
but without that sort of big romantic implication, there we go. It kind of makes her just seem more like straight up villainous and more threatening, because it's like you don't understand why she's doing the things she's doing. She's just kind of going for it, and it makes it like you don't know what to tell her to make her stop, because she has no real like strong desire besides what seems just like hatred, you know.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because like there's a famous documentary called the Celluloid Closet, and it's basically about the history of LGBT representation in the movies, and this is often cited as one of the first LGBT characters, and like a lot of like particularly critics that you do queer readings of film kind of cite this as both an important film and also a kind of negative film in that it's portraying a lesbian character as this like person that would like try to get a woman to kill herself because she's in love with another woman, and destroying the house of a couple so they won't be happy, things like that, and it's interesting because like on the one hand it is very negative, like this is like a really nasty character. It also was like monumental in that they had this code that wouldn't allow same-sex characters, and yet Hitchcock still pushed to have her in there and go like, no, this is a character that's in love with Rebecca, and that's informing her character. This needs to be in the movie,
Right. And even if he has to reduce it to make it like mostly just implied, yeah, but he wants it to be in there. Yeah, no, I think that's a very cool point. I didn't think about it like that. Or it's like, oh, this is one of the first lesbian characters to ever appear in a film, you know? If not the first. So to see how that impacts everything as well. It's also, probably one of the first lesbian characters to really appear in like a novel, except for what's that vampire novel? Hunter mentioned it in class.
Yeah.
Carmilla, which is also a lesbian character. So yeah, no, that's very cool to see how both are like LGBT icons. Slay.
All right. Well, any closing thoughts on this film discussion?
Besides like actual filmmaking and like cultural impact, both the book and the movie are just like okay. In like actual like how I enjoy them. I definitely read Rebecca again, given the chance. But I wouldn't. That's like, someone else assigns it for class. I'm like, oh, I'm not sad to read this again, but I'm not ecstatic. It's not like when we read Frankenstein, and I'm like, yeah, this is the 5th time I've read Frankenstein in 2 years. Let's go. With this, it just kind of seems like, it's definitely a good book, and it definitely has like cultural significance, especially to like the Romantic movement and the continuation of that. But I don't think it's like, a doorbuster,
Yeah, I enjoyed reading Rebecca. It wasn't like you, it wasn't my favorite thing that I've read for class, but I definitely think it's an important thing when talking about both LGBT characters and also like more contemporary Gothic literature. And I also like am a huge Hitchcock fan, and as far as Hitchcock movies goes, I don't think it's his best, but it's still pretty good. Like it's specifically around the point where Mr. De Winter admits that he may or may not have been involved with his wife's death. It starts to get interesting because otherwise a lot of times you're seeing these repetitive scenes of like the second Mrs. De Winter being scolded and mocked by Mrs. Danvers, and then Mr. De Winter not paying any attention to her. And but like once there's this this crime and the De Winters are trying to cover it up, it becomes really interesting and more akin to a lot of Hitchcock's movies.
One last thing before I just want to mention, there is one scene in this movie that I absolutely adore. Besides, like the scene where he's recounting what happened, the scene where they're getting interrogated by Rebecca's lover, in their like in the car after Miss De Winter faints. Maxim takes her out to the car, and they're sitting in the car, and Rebecca's lover comes in, and he's just got a bucket of like fried chicken, and he's just eating the chicken and being completely smarmy the whole time. You can tell like this man is out to ruin somebody else's life, you know? And he's completely like sucking the chicken off the bone and throwing it out the window. And I think he like offers one to like at some point, and it's just like it's a good villain moment where in a in a lot of movies there's like the trope of like them eating an apple to look like a villain or something, like, because I don't know in this he's just eating like a bucket of fried chicken. And it's like a little, like, besides being silly, it's like an actually good, like, oh my god, this intimidating character is eating fried chicken while he has no like interest in anything else.
You've taken long enough for that sketch. I shall expect a really fine work of art.
Oh, no, don't look at it. It's not nearly good enough.
But it can't be as bad as all that. Now, don't rub it all out. Let me see it first.
Well, it's the perspective. I never can get it
Let me
right.
see, let me see. Oh, dear.